Hello everyone, how are you all? This is the Introverted Astrologer, and before I start I'd like to say a big thank you to all my subscribers. Thank you for following my content. Thank you for your very polite feedback. Now we have the King's 76th birthday coming up very soon, and the last time we had a look we had a cliffhanger of a solar return for him. It was clear that a malefic fixed star called Algol would be hitting him hard. Algol is the demon star, the head of the Medusa, and it has a historic reputation for malevolence and for evil. And we also knew that the king would probably be hit hard by the upcoming eclipse season. And so today we're going to have a look at King Charles and the coming year. Let's have a look at what's behind that dreadful solar return. And let's kick this off with the chart which had painted such a startling picture. We had already established that the fixed star Algol is prominent in the birth charts of the royal family, and it tends to be around at critical events. This can include times of marriage, but also less happy times too. And you can see here in the solar return for King Charles' birthday, this November 2024, that fixed star Algol is in a very noticeable place. It's tight on the descendant. Now this solar return is cast for the exact moment that the king's sun returns to the same position it was in at the time of his birth, right down to the very degree and minute. And this chart gives us a picture of his life between November 2024 and November 2025. Of course, we also have this sun tight on the ascendant and opposing Uranus on the descendant. In my last video, we had picked this up, but at that point we had stopped. And so today we're going to be breaking it down and working out what is involved. This sun, Uranus and Algol are clearly heralding abrupt change and disruption. We know this is not going to be a normal humdrum royal year, but what is it that will change? Will it be the king's health, his life, his royal position? That Scorpio sun is firmly on the ascendant, and the sun can also show vitality, our consciousness, our life direction, what we are here for. And with Algol and Uranus caught up in this disruptive aspect, we need to consider how this sudden change may play out. The other major angle in a birth chart is the midheaven and the IC axis. And here we can see that Saturn is conjunct to the Imam Sealy, to the IC. We know that Saturn brings hardship, limitations, difficulty, duty, obligations. And the part of our chart that is the IC can represent family and home, but it can also be symbolic of our roots, our security and our heritage. Now above all, wherever Saturn is, we need to get real in the areas of our life where it shows up. And so something about family or home is going to be challenging. We can see from this square that this is a somewhat difficult and occasionally depressing journey. Because this chart has a Scorpio ascendant, Mars is one of its chart rulers. It's also in a position of what we call mutual reception with that sun, because Mars is in the sign of Leo, which the sun rules, and the sun is in the sign of Scorpio, of which Mars is a co-ruler. Mars and Sun are very much planets which we can closely link with vitality, energy, with the will to live. That Mars is in the 10th whole sign house of Leo, which is the house that is caught up with career, our status. It's a very public house and speaks of our social standing too. And Mars is in a T-square with Pluto, the other ruler of Scorpio, and also the Moon. When we have Mars and Pluto together in this way, we are looking at extreme force, great control, extortionate effort. And with the moon being involved too, there is a sense of upheaval, of our emotional security being tossed out of the window, and we may be dealing with issues that involve emotional anger or conflict. I think we can also pick up from this moon that the king will have a lot of support around him from his family and his wife, Queen Camilla, over the coming year. That's because the moon is happy in its own home. It's in the 7th whole sign house of Taurus, and it's making a trine with that Venus. So we're speaking of loving links, of affection, of emotional support and warmth. But because Mars rules the 6th whole sign house of Aries, there could be a health connection with these difficult Mars-Pluto energies. The 6th house speaks of our duties, of our routines, and very pertinently also of physical health. I've added a couple of the asteroids which we can associate with health conditions, with illness and with healing too. These are Hygeia and Chiron, and we can see this pair very closely here in the 6th whole sign house, and the 6th house is of course connected with health and routine. We can also see that Hygeia is being caught up in this T-square aspect going on with Moon, Pluto and Mars, and that they are both in conjunct or quincunx to the king's sun. So we have this picture of the king's vitality still being sapped, of his health being drained. Quincunxes are aspects of tension and adjustment. The closest aspect in this chart is extremely tight, and it's that inconjunct between Mars and Venus. There's just a minute between them. This Chiron in the 6th whole sign house is on its midpoint. So again we could be looking at wounded health. Whilst we typically think of Mars and Venus as being a passionate and creative kind of energy, it has other symbolisms too. There is a health connection with disturbances in bodily function. A life-changing battle with cancer would naturally affect every aspect of our life and be a game changer. And so I am personally suspecting that the king's healing journey is not necessarily over. We can make out a near exact sextile between Chiron and Jupiter there. And I'm hopeful that this is going to assuage some of the king's journey. Jupiter promotes hope, faith and healing, so fingers crossed. There are some strengths to this return. We've already discussed that the Sun and Mars are going to extend a strong degree of help and support to each other because they are in mutual reception. There's a similar situation going on between Mercury and Jupiter. Mercury is in Sagittarius, which is Jupiter's sign, and Jupiter is in Gemini, which is Mercury's sign. And so these two planets will also offer strong support to each other. They'll help the king to look on the bright side, to carry out planning for the future with common sense and forethought. We've been able to pick up a lot just by looking at this solar return on its own, but we can find out a lot more by comparing this chart with King Charles' birth chart. And so here we have the King's birth chart in the centre, and the solar return planets are placed around the chart in green. Immediately we can pick up strong interconnections. That Mars, Pluto, Moon, T-square that we discussed in the solar return on its own is actually hitting pivotal points in the King's birth chart. Mars-Pluto is straddling his ascendant-descendant axis, which is such a sensitive place. It's drawing in the King's natal moon and his Mercury in this big, tight, grand cross formation. And so I think huge amounts of the King's energy are going to be caught up in this conflict, and there could potentially be some decision making or communication in this too. There's a great deal of intensity here, big emotional stresses. Pluto can usher in crisis, and we're already aware that the king was under the difficult transit of Pluto squaring his natal moon. The involvement of Mercury is not only implying great mental stress, but it is also hinting at future decision making, decisions which might involve family because of this fourth house connection. This is reinforced by also remembering that the ascendant of this year's solar return is bringing to the forefront the King's fourth whole sign house, which is here. And we can imagine the exhaustive application and determination involved in these points. I'd also like to show you the Converse solar return, which has been calculated by going back in time 76 years before the King's birthday. As we already know, stepping back in time in this way can show us events which have a more fated or karmic feeling about them. We won't analyse the whole thing, but I just wanted to show you how certain themes of health and healing, and also of abrupt change, are being repeated here too. So again, we have the King's birth chart in the centre, and the returns planets are placed in the outer ring in pale blue. There it is again, Uranus on the ascendant, and very tightly so. Uranus is the change and the disruption that we identified in the direct return, and we can also see that the Hygeia of the return is very tightly on the ascendant. These two are both sitting on the King's natal Jupiter, and so I'm very much hoping that this is speaking of ongoing recovery. And the returns Chiron of wounds and healing is conjunct to the King's natal midheaven. The synchronicity of these returns is uncanny, and they are confirming again our use of Hygeia and Chiron to evaluate the King's healing journey. And we can also see that these two asteroids are showing us the ongoing healing throughout 2025 too. Now, between now and next year, we do have some eclipses to get through, and these are particularly relevant to King and country. We know that we have an eclipse season coming along very soon, with a lunar eclipse on the 18th of September and a solar eclipse on the 2nd of October. This eclipse energy is concerned with partings, with endings and finishings, and with low physical energy. The solar eclipse in particular, on the 2nd of October, affects quite a few of the royal charts, including Prince William, Princess Catherine, and also Queen Camilla. It falls here on the King's IC, a very sensitive point, within around 3 degrees of orb. And this could be quite difficult, particularly given the wide range of key royal players who are going to be affected. And so I'll put up on the screen a summary of the different royal members and which personal points are going to be affected by the solar or lunar eclipse. The October solar eclipse is also going to fall on the ascendant of Great Britain's Union chart, and so we need to be especially vigilant in the few months around the October 2024 eclipse because of its national impact too. I'm going to put up on the screen some of the solar arc contacts which are relevant during this period. There are also a couple of progressions which might interest you, so I'll list those too. In the centre we have the King's natal birth chart, and around the outer edge we have the progressed positions in green glyphs, and the solar arc positions are in blue. Now, one of the solar arc aspects that I've been concerned about is solar arc Saturn, because it will very shortly conjunct the King's natal sun. It's exact around early October, and this can be an aspect which has poor health connotations, although it could equally speak of very strong duties or heavy commitments. There can be a depletion of our physical resources, a sense of difficulty. We may feel very overworked, and so we'll have to wait and see how this plays out. Solar arc directions don't always play out exactly as they become exact. They can manifest at any time over a given year. However, we can also see that the King's progressed moon is currently travelling through the sign of Aquarius, and it will oppose the King's natal Pluto around late September of 2024. Progressions tend to have a little more precision than solar arcs, and so we can certainly anticipate this period as coming with a certain amount of emotional overhaul. We can feel as though our inner emotional security is being somewhat pulverised. And so we've got a few things coming to a head in the next few months. And I would say September through to November of 2024 is looking quite concerning. We can also add to that the fact that transiting Mars, whilst not an outer planet, is soon going to have a lengthy retrograde cycle as it moves through late Cancer, reaches the King's ascendant, and then retrogrades again. This means there will be quite a few months of Mars being in the King's 12th house, and so certainly a time of lower physical energy, potentially a period when we stay out of the limelight, in the house of seclusion. A time when we need to be on guard against shooting ourselves in the foot, because self-sabotage can be a theme of Mars in the 12th. We're all hoping that the King will continue to make great strides forward. He has been devoted to his duties despite his health issues, and in fact he's intending to visit Australia this October with Queen Camilla. I'm enjoying a little break from my political videos, and so my next batch of videos is going to look at the royal family. We'll look at the other members of the royal family and their upcoming year. And I'd also like to have a look at the relationship between Prince William and Princess Catherine in due course. But this analysis will be a little different because we'll bring in some of the tools that Magi astrology uses for relationship analysis. And so it will be enlightening and instructive. Until then, take care of yourselves and God bless you and your families.